Hello, and welcome to the WordPress Speed online course. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we'll be learning together how to speed up your WordPress site. Now, there are a lot of different advantages to speeding up your sites, such as having good user experience and getting better rankings with Google and other search engines and so on. So that's what we're going to be covering in this course. First things first, I want to mention that in speeding up your website, there are so many different variables and different elements to it, and we're just going to focus on a few. We're going to focus on the most important ones that will help you speed up your whole site, typically about anywhere from 50 to 75%. Remember, this is an ongoing process, and I want you to know that it's like getting a brand new car. You're going to need to constantly maintain your website's speed. Just remember that it takes baby steps to complete each and every one of these elements that we discuss in the course, so try not to get too overwhelmed. Get a few steps done first, move on, and go from there. So, before we move on to our next lesson, let's talk about what you need to have in hand. Obviously, this course will talk about WordPress sites, but you can take this information and the concepts that I'm giving you and apply to a non-WordPress site too. However, keep in mind I'm going to give you specifics in relation to WordPress and web hosting for WordPress. You'll also need to have a cPanel for Hotlink Protection. Most hosts provide cPanel. If you're not using cPanel, then you most likely do have Hotlink Protection on it. That is typically built in. Of course, you will also need to have an extra investment ready for possible content delivery networks and image optimization. So, let's move on to our next lesson, and I wish you a happy learning. Hello and welcome back. Today, we'll talk about the advantages of having a website that loads really fast. You already had a glimpse of why site speed is important, but to ensure that we're on the same page, let's discuss why you need to speed up your WordPress site now. Like I said earlier, there are two major factors at play here. First, we have user experience, and secondly, we have search engine ranking factors. Now, they're both very important, but in reality, you should focus on making sure that the user experience is the best it can be. If you can think about it, your users are who you are trying to impress, right? These are the visitors who you're trying to engage, and ultimately, that is who is going to take action, whether that's be signing up to your list, or buy your product, follow you, or become a fan of your brand. Ultimately, like I said, that is who you're trying to impress. At the end of the day, even though Google and the other search engines change their algorithm, if you look at a long-term view, giving that user the best experience possibly will actually impact your search engine ranking. At the end of the day, for Google and other search engines, their goal is to impress upon the person who is looking for your website. Visitors go to Google, they search, and that is their customer. You are not Google's customer. Visitors who perform search are their customers. But that is your customer as well. It's easy to get in the mindset of, oh, I just want to get rankings. I just want to get traffic. Then you get the traffic, and the person who's coming to your site isn't interested. They skip your site, and they go to somebody else's. So remember, if you impress upon them, you will impress Google. Now, if you think about it for just a second, as information becomes easily accessible within seconds, the human attention span actually gets shorter and shorter. If you think about back in the day, like decades ago, when we didn't have the internet, information was not easily accessible. But now it is easily accessible, and the demand for data increases. Therefore, people's patience becomes shorter. They're able to get information instantly with their smartphones and their tablets and all of that. The patience essentially becomes shorter, and as it becomes shorter, so does their patience for your site load speed. So, it just makes sense when you look at it that way. The longer your visitors stay, the lower your bounce rate is. Bounce rate is a technical term for prospects leaving your site. So, your goal at the end of the day is to get a lower bounce rate. For example, if somebody goes to Google and they type in a keyword phrase, let's say scuba diving, and they come to your website, they leave, and they go back to Google within seconds, that is what we call bounce rate. If you have a lot of people that do that, say at 100 people, you have 99 people that come to your website and within seconds leave and go back to Google, Google can detect this, and they that note of that. Imagine, for some weird reason, people are going to your site and leaving within seconds, so your site must not be relevant to them. That would be a logical conclusion for Google. Your site must not be what they're looking for. Therefore, Google says we're going to rank you lower. If a large amount of people are doing this thing, Google knows that your site is irrelevant. Perhaps it doesn't have good content, or even if it does, that is what they assume, or they assume the site loads slowly. So, if you think about it from that standpoint, and you adjust the user experience to be the best it can be, you'll essentially win the Google search engine game. That is how you kill two birds with one stone. In other words, win in both areas by really focusing on the user experience first, and then SEO and all that will come along the way. Even if you're not 100% being optimized to the SEO, you will win the game in the long run. Because when people will genuinely love your site, you win anyway. So, out of 100 people, let's say you may have 50 people who come and go, but you will have 50 people who stay for around 15 minutes to 30 minutes, or even to an hour. That tells Google you have a 50% bounce rate, and 50% of people are liking your content. If you have a lower bounce rate, let's say 10%, and then 90 out of 100 people are staying for a long period of time, that tells Google, hey, wait a minute, this site must be extremely relevant. People are obviously staying on the site for a long period of time, and therefore the site must be relevant. The site must be good. So Google will rank you higher. You see what I mean? So, now that you have a basic premise of what to look for and what to focus on, let's move on to our next lessons and find out what slows your site down. Hello, and welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about reasons why your site is slow. Now, to understand how to speed your site up, you really need to understand first and foremost what is slowing it down. There are hundreds and hundreds of different reasons. Our goal here is the 20-80 rule, meaning we're going to find the most common variables and focus on them. Basically, this means we'll perform little tweaks here and there to get the biggest impact. So, instead of trying to teach you hundreds of different variables, which would be time-consuming and very overwhelming, we'll look at little tweaks. What I advise you to do is implement each one of these step by step. However, each of these tweaks can take a good amount of time. Some of them will take less, some of them will take more, but some of these will make a huge impact on how fast your site loads. So, let's start. Number 1. Remember, your WordPress site has just way too many things in it. It's bloated with too much code, too many plugins, or too many pages, posts, images, and everything else. It just has way too much data in it. If you think about your computer, you know that if you add too many things onto your PC or your Mac computer, as an analogy here, then your computer will become slower and slower and slower. Same concept here as well. If your WordPress site has too many things, or your web hosting is just too slow, that's the number one reason why your site loads slow. When it comes hosting companies, this is your reason number 2. Sometimes the plan that you're under can actually impact how slow and how fast your site loads. Now, bear in mind that the reality is that WordPress sites in general, after they have become bloated, they use a lot of CPU and server resources. I want to be clear here to say that when you install WordPress by default, with nothing on it, it usually runs very fast. But later, when things are added to it like plugins, images, or other code, then WordPress site tends to slow down. Another issue is that the majority of websites are hosted on shared hosting, and we'll talk more about that later on. Because it is on shared hosting, you're essentially sharing a server with hundreds or more other people. Of course, they will impact your site. It's not necessarily that you're doing anything wrong. So for example, on shared hosting, if you have other people crashing the server, then you're affected as well. That simply means that your whole website will become slow, because with shared hosting, you're sharing the server with thousands of people. It's like you're sharing a house, essentially, with hundreds of other people, and you're all using the same kitchen or the same bathroom. And of course, we'll discuss this later on. Number 3, your images are way too big. One thing that a lot of us forget about is that different people have different internet speeds. Some are on slower speeds, and some are on faster speeds. Just because you have a faster speed doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else has a faster speed. So if it loads faster for you, it may not run fast for other people. There's something to bear in mind. If your images are way too big, then they need to be squeezed down. According to Google, images often take about 60% of total page weight. They take up too much room, and you need to size them down. This means that most websites are being slowed down because they have way too many images that are just taking too long to load. Nowadays, there are plugins, platforms, and software applications out there that will help you essentially speed up and optimize all of your images all at once without ever having to get into Photoshop. The next one is hotlinking. Hotlinking means displaying an image on a website by linking to the website hosting the image. The link gets the source data of the picture each time it is needed. This means somebody else could be linking to your site, your images, or your videos. What they're doing is sending traffic to those images and videos, and you'll be getting people that don't even know that they're your images, and they're just stealing your images. If that's the case, they're essentially using your bandwidth and your server resources, so be aware of that. The next thing is caching. Caching is essentially what your internet browser does when you visit sites on a regular basis. Your browser usually saves tons and tons of images and other files like HTML files, CSS files, and other files, so that when you go back to that website at a later date, it's already sitting on your computer, and therefore it loads super fast. You can do the same thing with WordPress. We'll discuss about that later on as well. The next thing that could help your speed is content delivery networks. What that means is, basically, let's say if you're using a hosting company from the USA, and if somebody is connecting to you from the other side of the world, let's say from the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, or Philippines, maybe Russia, or anywhere else, and they come to your website, their computer has to travel all the way through the internet to the USA server just to view your website. As you can imagine, that will literally slow things down to a halt, even if it runs super fast on your side, because let's say you are in the USA. Next to the server, your visitors have to go all the way over there, or vice versa. This really goes to slow things down, especially if your customer base is all over the world. So, content delivery networks, or in short, CDNs, are basically web hosting data centers that are positioned all over the world, in all the places that I mentioned just now. Let's say, for example, that you're using a CDN, and those servers are placed strategically all over the world close to those people. So when somebody goes to your website, instead of having to travel all the way back to USA, they essentially are going to go to the location that is nearest to them. That's what a CDN is all about. Those can be very, very powerful. We'll talk about the different types of CDNs out there in our next lessons. With that said, let's move on. Welcome back, guys. Today, we're going to talk about having too much in your site. By this, I mean there's just way too much data in your website to the point that it has become literally bloated. As I stated in the previous video, most WordPress sites take up a lot of resources after you've started to add a ton of WordPress plugins, images, pages, posts, and other demo content. Perhaps your WordPress theme is just bloated with tons of code too. In this case, you really want to ask yourself, do I really need this? In fact, a lot of times, it's super easy to go through your WordPress site and install a bunch of plugins because it makes your site user experience really amazing. And that's great, but you really need to ask yourself, do I really need this for every single item on your site? If you really haven't thought about this, maybe you need to go back to your WordPress site, go through every single item, and perhaps delete some plugins. For the ones that you don't need, delete them and deactivate them. One thing to remember is, when you first installed a WordPress theme, it usually comes with a lot of demo content that has been built into it to show you what the site could potentially look like. That said, if you install the demo content and you just tweak it a little bit here and there, and you don't go back and delete all the demo content, then your site is going to load extremely slow. This often includes unnecessary images, posts, and pages that simply clog up your site. That is what's happening here. A lot of themes will come with tons and tons of amazing features that look amazing, and it could potentially increase your conversions, increase your sales, and all this great stuff. But at the end of the day, the more features and options there are in a theme, the more code there is. And the more code there is, the slower the site will run. Plugins are actually a huge variable that will slow down your site too, and they'll create security backdoors as well. Let me clarify on this here. WordPress itself, when you install it, is secure, but the plugins that you've installed are developed by third-party people and are not related to WordPress in any way. They are often programmed without regards to standards. Even though they could be programmed to their highest standards, they're not directly from WordPress. That's something to keep in mind. There is no real standard for plugins. It's almost like having a computer, whether it's a PC or Mac, and you're installing to your computer a software from different third parties instead of from Microsoft. And you don't know how they programmed it. You don't know if their programming standards are up to par. You don't know any of that. You just know that you install the software. That's it. Now, it's super easy to want to start installing tons of different plugins for your WordPress site because it can make the user experience a lot better. That's why you really need to ask yourself every time you install something, do I really need this? So, our recommendation to you is to try to stick with a maximum of 10 plugins per WordPress site, if that's possible. If you have to have more plugins, then you really need to think about making sure that your web hosting plan can actually take it. Make sure you've got enough speed, you've got enough resources to be able to handle that. That's another reason why you need to have a good web hosting plan, which we'll talk about in just a minute. The number of images is fine, and we'll discuss how to squeeze them down. But when you get to a point where you have hundreds of images or even thousands of images, that can be a problem in itself. Also, when you create posts and pages, perhaps try to remove all the ones that you don't need first. This will usually speed up your site a little bit. We've seen websites that have had literally hundreds or even thousands of posts, and those sites often take a lot more resources to run. Having a lot of these kind of sites on shared hosting plans will slow your site down. So, go ahead and do a quick cleanup of your site now and really ask yourself, do I really need this? No matter whether it is a plugin or a page or an image. Hello and welcome to lesson number 5. We're going to talk about your web hosting today and the big question, is your web hosting slowing your WordPress site down? This is a big variable that a lot of times we don't even think about. Did you know that most web hosting setups are just not made for WordPress? This is especially true if you're paying for a shared web hosting plan, which is in my guess the majority of you. While it may be working now, if you do have a WordPress site and it is running fast, your site will slow down as you begin to grow. Let me explain this and help you better understand the idea. I'm going to give you an analogy here. Imagine if you lived in a house, but instead of having 1 or 2 roommates, you now had 100 or 200 roommates. The more roommates you have, the more chaotic it becomes. If you think about just adding 5 or 10 or 100 people, your life will turn into chaos, because now you have other people who may have different intentions that will affect you in some way. Now, think about it deeper. You barely have any room. You don't have room in the fridge to store your food. And if you have a few roommates that are causing problems, what happens? If you think about it, it often spreads to everybody else, right? If somebody decides, hey, let's go have a party, everybody is going to have a party. Everybody's going to jump in. As silly as this sounds, this is what shared hosting is like. On the flip side, you might have heard of a dedicated server. They tend to cost a lot more money, about $150 to $200 per month. But it's kind of like owning your house. Instead of having 100 roommates or even 2 roommates, you own that house. It's on your own rules, and whatever happens in that house happens in that house. But it's usually well worth that amount of money because you don't have to worry about others trying to mess up your life. Most of you will not be able to afford $150 to $200 a month, especially if you're starting out as a small business. The next big thing is what we call a VPS, or Virtual Private Server. Now, let me give you an example of what it is. This is like living in an apartment with your own roommates, and the apartment is split up into individual rooms. So you have your own room within the apartment housing. That's what a VPS, or a Virtual Private Server, is. Whatever happens in your own room affects your room. If you drop a plate, if you drop some milk, or if something bad happens in your room, it's in your room. You don't get affected by others. In a real virtual private server, It's basically like having a house where whenever somebody affects you in the other apartment, like maybe below you or above you, they're not going to affect you directly. So if they crash their server or they crash their website, that will not affect you. That's the beauty of a VPS or virtual private server. That said, not all VPSs are created equal either. In fact, there are a lot of web hosting companies out there that fully understand and capitalize in WordPress. The way they set up their memory, the hard drives, and the software is optimized for WordPress. It's kind of like going to a cardiologist for your heart problems versus to a general practitioner. The general practitioner may understand a little bit about your heart and how to help you, but the cardiologist is really going to know how to help you. So, yes, go to a specialized web host to get hosted because they understand your needs specifically. They understand WordPress and how it operates. That's why I say a lot of VPSs out there are not made for WordPress. Therefore, even if you get a good VPS, you might find that your site does not run fast. But if you find a VPS specialized in WordPress, you'll find that your WordPress site will actually run fast because they understand what affects what. They've taken all these variables into account and made it easier for you to make sure that your site is running fast. Let's discuss a few places that would be great for running your WordPress site. What you're looking for is managed WordPress hosting. The first one that we recommend is called WPEngine.com, and they specialize in WordPress. One thing I would mention here is, whenever you look at the pricing will cost a little bit more than a usual web host, but that's because they specialize in WordPress. So, when you get an account with them, they will set it up in a way so that it is WordPress friendly. Like I said before, most virtual private servers or dedicated servers are not really made for WordPress, so WPEngine.com is a good one. The next one is called WPXHosting.com. One thing to know is I would definitely not recommend places like HostGator.com. Even though a lot of these web hosting companies will say that they are WordPress friendly, a lot of times that's kind of like going to a general practitioner when you're having a heart problem. They're saying, well, we could offer you some advice for your heart, but in reality, you want to go to a specialist, right? These two web hosting companies specialize in WordPress, so I definitely can recommend these two for your WordPress site. Welcome back. We're going to talk about image optimization now. We touched base briefly on this earlier in the previous videos. Like I said, most WordPress sites have slow loading images, and not just WordPress sites, but websites in general, especially depending on where your visitor is located and how fast their internet connection is. You have to assume that your visitors don't have a fast internet speed because you want it to be as fast as possible. In this day and age, if you really think about it, you need to have images on your site because it creates more human engagement. You can't say, I'm not going to have any images, and just go with text, because otherwise, that would just be boring. One thing to keep in mind is, firstly, you want to make sure that you have the right file format for your images. For example, JPEG and PNG files are what you want to use when it comes to putting them on your blogs on a WordPress site. JPEGs and PNGs are file formats or images that are squeezed down easily and they are compressed for web use. GIFs, on the other hand, are basically animated images, but they are also compressed as well. Like I said, these files are very web friendly. However, you should remember, the more images you have, the more it adds up. But the good news is that now there are a number of tools and WordPress plugins that will actually help you achieve this without you having to buy Photoshop, squeeze them manually, and all of that. So let's go ahead and discuss them right now. I'm going to show it to you so that you're aware of what's out there. So, what you're looking for is a WordPress plugin that you can simply install into your WordPress site that will automate the process of optimizing and compressing your images. At the end of the day, you're going to be busy, so you're not going to have time to sit there and optimize. You need something that will kind of do it automatically every time you upload an image. So, we've tested several of them, and out of the ones that we've tested, we've come down to two. The one that we really like is called Smush Image Compression and Optimization. If you go to wordpress.org/plugins/wp-smushit, there are some free levels. There are some levels you pay for as well,
but this is the one that we tested that out in actually. We have tested other ones out, and they've actually messed up our site, but we can definitely recommend this one. You can also go into your WordPress dashboard and do a search for WP Smush It, or just Smush Image, and look for the author. The author is going to be WPMU Dev. This one is good. Another one is called EWWW Image Optimizer, and that's another good one as well. Hi there. Today, let's talk about Parasite Protection. Parasites in the insect world include ticks and leeches. They find a host and suck their blood to survive. So essentially, in terms of websites, you are the host, and somebody out there is the parasite. It's the same in the digital world. You have other people who are linking to your images, your videos, and other big files. This is not to be confused with backlinks. These are not people who are linking to your site because your site is a good resource for them. Think instead the dark side of it. These are people who are linking to you because they're either claiming your images, your videos, and your big files as theirs. So, you might be thinking, why would somebody do that at all? You didn't authorize them. However, that's very common nowadays. If you think about it, if you've got images on your website, most likely Google has indexed your images into their Google image search engine, and somebody else has come along to the image on the search engine they found it. They look for an image and they might think, oh, I like that image. I'm going to use that on my website. They might give you credit, which is great, but that's far and few. Most likely, they might think, well, I like this image. I'm going to link to it and I'm going to put it on my web host. If you get too many of those, eventually, they begin to use your server resources that you pay for. They're not paying for it. You're paying for it. And then they use your videos and your bandwidth that you pay for. So, keeping that in mind, you're going to need to protect yourself. Like I said, what ends up happening is that you would be spending money on more web hosting resources. To protect yourself from this is by using what we call cPanel, which is a very popular web hosting panel that most web hosting companies use. Now, if you don't have cPanel, this might mean that most probably your web hosting company have rebranded cPanel to look like their own brand. So you should probably still have it. But if not, usually you could find the hot linking feature that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. Remember, sometimes hosting companies will have their own hot linking feature. Essentially, what it does is it disables people from becoming a parasite of your website and using your server resources. So, if your web hosting company doesn't use cPanel, they may have a hot linking feature. If they don't, you can always message them and say, hey, do you have a hot link protection? Now, let me show you step by step how to implement this. What you want to do is go ahead and log into your cPanel. If you need to do that, go ahead and pause the video and do that now. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that you are already in your cPanel. To get to Hotlink Protection, all you need to do is simply scroll down and go to the security section here. We see Hotlink Protection, so go ahead and click on that. If you look at it, it says Hotlink Protection prevents other websites from directly linking to you. We don't need to enable it yet, but what we need to do is enter the URL to allow access. Let's say, for example, we use yourdomain.com. What you want to do is enter yourdomain.com, and then anytime yourdomain.com accesses the image, it's okay. However, anytime somebody else that is not yourdomain.com accesses your site, then they will be denied. What you want to do is put yourdomain.com here, and that should be it. But if you use www or you have HTTPS, you could add that as well. Hypothetically, that shouldn't really matter, but we'll do that here just to make sure. Remember, these are just variations of yourdomain.com. We can enter that here. And let's say that you want another site to have access. Let's say you have yourseconddomain.com. You can put it as https://yourseconddomain.com. Let's say, for example, that you have a sister site, and that sister site is okay to access your images. You want to enter that here. Basically, what you're telling the system is these domains are okay to access these images or whatever files that is. If you want to add, let's say, an MP4 file, if you have videos on your site and you only want these sites to access them, You want to make sure that you have the file formats inside here. Another thing is if there are zip files, downloadable zip files, you want to put zip in here. That means anytime somebody accesses any type of these file formats from these sites, it's okay. If they access it from elsewhere, for somebody else's site, the system is going to block them. Now, you have different choices. You can enter a redirect URL, so if somebody tried to access that image and they're doing so from a different site, then you can redirect them to another page or whatever page that you want. This can be good depending on what kind of business you're in. For example, if you're a photographer and you don't mind people licensing your images, then you can redirect them to maybe a page where you're trying to sell licensing to images. Obviously, if you're not a photographer in that case, then you wouldn't really need that. But that options is just there if you want to redirect people to a certain page. Once you're done, you just simply submit, and then you click enable, and you're good to go. Now, let's talk about WordPress caching. Caching, pronounced caching, is the process of storing data in a cache. A cache is a temporary storage area. For example, the files you automatically request by looking at a web page are stored on your hard disk in a cache subdirectory under the directory of your browser. As discussed earlier, the way caching works is your internet browser makes a copy of the items on the page, such as images, text, and other media elements. As you can imagine, the purpose of this is that the next time you visit a website, your browser will load the site at a much faster rate. You can do the same thing with your WordPress sites so that your returning visitors can experience the same thing. That way, if they visit it once, your site might load somewhat slowly, but the next time they visit it, the site will load really fast. Let's discuss some of the most popular caching plugins right now. When it comes to WordPress caching plugins, a lot of times you'll see that many people will say that W3 Total Cache is the biggest and the best plugin out there. We've had the chance to test this out, and yes, it does have good results. At the same time, it's very complex, and there are a lot of different settings within it, so there's somewhat of a learning curve in order to use this. The next great plugin for caching is WP Super Cache, and that is by Automatic. If you're not familiar with Automatic, this is the same company that has developed WordPress, so they are literally the biggest WordPress company because they invented WordPress. If you look through here, you'll see that a lot of people have installed it. Many reviews are really good. They say it has lightning fast speed and works really well, and that's the thing we like about Automatic. Whenever you use plugins from them, you're pretty much guaranteed that the plugin will run smoothly, and it will run effectively because they'll come out with tons and tons of updates simply because they invented WordPress. That's their reputation at stake. So, they have the best of the best knowledge as far as that goes. These are other caching plugins that focus on one area. Another plugin that we've actually tested and had really good results with is vipercache.com. You try it out as well. Alright, that's it for today. I will see you in our next lesson where we will talk about content delivery networks. Now we're going to talk about content delivery networks. We briefly talked about this earlier, but in most cases, when you run a website, you want to have a CDN or a content delivery network, especially if you're trying to reach visitors from around the world. As we mentioned earlier, if your web hosting server is in the United States, for example, and your prospect is in the United Kingdom or Canada or New Zealand, then what happens is they have to connect all the way from their computer in the UK to the server in the USA. So if you're in the USA or you're in Russia and the server happens to be next to you, then it is going to load super fast for you. But just because it loads fast for you if you're in the United States does not mean that it can load super fast for everybody else. It's kind of like saying, okay, I'm going to go to the store and it's only going to take me 5 minutes, but you have a friend that is an hour away and it's going to take them literally an hour to get there, not speaking of traffic or other possible roadblocks that he's going to face. That's the main reason why you need content delivery network. So, take the same example. It's like if it takes you 5 minutes to get to the store and that store says, you know what? We're going to replicate ourselves and we're going to put a store near your friends so that instead of going 1 hour away, He goes about 5 minutes away. That's going to be more convenient for your friend, right? That's the way a content delivery network works. They are a massive data center that they have many different servers placed all over the world, oftentimes in each city, in each country, and each state. So that's anyone from around the world can access your site at a much faster rate. The content delivery network will make a big difference. So if you change your web hosting to a specialized WordPress hosting and you add a content delivery network and you implement the elements that we talked about to make sure that your site is not too big, those few things there can actually speed up your whole site. So how CDN works is they deliver the content, in this case, to that person to the closest server to them. As we mentioned in this example, if you're using a CDN, it's going to show your website to that person through the closest server. So it really makes life a lot better for your visitors no matter where they are. There are many other benefits to using a CDN besides just being close. In addition to that is security. You can actually block out high-risk areas and high-risk IP addresses as well, because the CDN is so big and massive, a lot of times it will share data. If it finds that there's a hacker hacking another site, they'll share that data and make sure that they block that person when they try to access your site. So, there are a lot of other amazing benefits to having a CDN. There are several CDNs that you can use. You, of course, only need to have one. Let's discuss that now. There are two main content delivery networks that we highly recommend. There are many other ones, but you really have to think about it. You want to make sure that the company that you go with is big enough, so they have so many different servers around the world that you can use. These two are actually very user-friendly, and that is why we are recommending them. First is Cloudflare.com. We've used their service before. They have a free version, but in order to really make use of it and get the benefits, you really have to use the $20 per month upgrade. This is on a per domain basis. At the end of the day, if this seems a lot to many of you right now, I would say it will actually save you a lot of bandwidth. In fact, it'll protect you. It'll give you security that you need. Plus, if you have a global network and you're trying to reach as many people around the world as much as possible, it really is going to help you in the long run. The only case that you would never really need to have a CDN is if you're only a local business and you're simply trying to cater to people within a very small segment of a city and they're all next to the servers. That's the only time that you would not really use a CDN. We've used Cloudflare and it's worked very well. We highly recommend that. You don't really need the business version or the enterprise version unless you're getting a ton of traffic. Obviously, you can start with free version and see how that goes. Then as time goes on, upgrade to Pro if you can. Remember, if you already have a couple hundred to couple thousand visitors per month and you're running a site already, definitely go with the Pro version if possible. The next thing we recommend is Max CDN. That is maxcdn.com. As you can see, the price is already a little bit cheaper than Cloudflare. Max CDN is really good as well, and it's really hard to say whether Max CDN is better than Cloudflare or Cloudflare is better than Max CDN. At the end of the day, it really depends on your preference. So, you could start with Max CDN because there's only $9 a month, and they offer a good amount of benefits as well. You'll see that they limit you up to 1 terabyte. What that means is, unless you're using 1 terabyte, which is 1,000 gigabytes worth of bandwidth, you don't really need to move up. That's a nice thing about Max CDN. Their pricing definitely wins a little bit over Cloudflare. But as far as setup goes, for both of these, they are actually very easy to set up. They've made it very user-friendly, and that's one of the main reasons why we recommend them, on top of their huge network and being able to reach as many visitors as you can. Congratulations! I guess this is it. We've covered a lot in this course, and hopefully you've enjoyed it and will give us a thumbs up. But if there's something you're not happy with, please reach back to us via comments or discussion board, or you can even send us a private message. We'll be happy to assist. Congratulations once again. And now, I would like to wish good luck with your business. Goodbye for now.